Next up, we will have live online Jonathan Lear. He will be joining us, and I hope he is here online. He is the head of food and tourism research at the University College Absalon, Roskilde. He has published widely on food culture, notably on the new Nordic cuisine and contemporary food trends. He is PhD in research project Sustainable Food Tourism in the Nordic region, funded by the Nordic Council of Ministers. Also, Jonathan is visiting lecturer at the University of Gastronomic Science in Polenzo, Italy, and a member of the Danish Gastronomic Academy. We will give the floor to you, Jonathan. Are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me? Am I going through?
Sorry, Jonathan, you can't hear the crowd here, but they were all applauding for you. So keep on. We hear you really well.
Perfect. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you very much. And good afternoon from Copenhagen, where I'm sitting. Unfortunately, I was not able to come and join me, you other guys, as I had anticipated. But yeah, luckily I can be here with you digitally today. And as mentioned, I work with food and culture and tourism, and I will just really happy to be here today, and thank you for this wonderful conference and for inviting me. And also thank you very much for all the other lovely speakers and for this great program you have put together. Asta and Brunja, it's really great to be a part of that. Thank you. So I will now start sharing my screen. And I hope you can all see it. If not, please let me know. So, as mentioned, I'm Jonathan Lear, and I'm head of food and tourism research at our university college called Absalon here in Roskilde, close to Copenhagen. And I'm here basically because I'm part of a research project where I've been in dialogue with various of the people here in Iceland, who also is a part of the project, and it's called Sustainable Food Tourism in the Nordic region. And it's funded by the Nordic Council of Ministers, and we have been a little bit delayed, of course, by the COVID, but we are now fully on to work with it. And I will today share some thoughts on what does sustainable tourism means. And how can we think about this in a Nordic context? So the background for the project is obviously, as we've been heard about today as well, that there are quite a lot of sorry, do you not have access to the presentation? Or I hope you will. Oh, sorry, I just saw something in the chat, but I hope you can all see it. No, so the background is there's the New Nordic Cuisine Manifesto and this whole New Nordic movement, which has been celebrated around the world. And I took the liberty here of posing a picture of the 2019 Bocuse where we have all the three Scandinavian countries on the podium in Lyon. And the Danes at the first place. I would just note that without any national feelings at all, just the fact. But also, this has led to a lot of focus both on food tourism and seeing the whole Nordic region as a culinary destination, and also, particularly, I think sustainability has been a large part of that. So there is this obvious connection between sustainability and food tourism, as we've also heard from various of the other speakers today. But it's of course important to say, what does this mean? What is sustainable food tourism? And we talk about sustainable tourism. I've here taken the UNWTO's definition. And there is kind of, as you know, sustainability is used in many ways by many actors in many different ways. But I think it's important to cut into what does it actually mean. And there are a lot of people using it in different ways. And I think this definition is interesting also because there are three different kinds of layers. You have the one about nature and climate and the ecological processes and conservation of nature. You have something about cultural heritage and local values. And then you have something about social and economic justice, as Eric also talked about earlier, that it's not always that a lot of the tourism is important to the right actors. Yeah. So I think that's important to talk about that. But if we just think about it in terms of climate and carbon footprint, we have to say that tourism is not sustainable. That is the sad news for you today, but you knew this already, I think. And there is a great book also by Michael C. Hall and Stephen Gustling, an edited volume, where they also talk about this paradox for many contemporary consumers, that on the one hand, we want to be mobile, we want to travel around the world, see other cultures firsthand and so on, as we do as tourists. And at the same time, we want to be sustainable. Unfortunately, these are antagonistic terms. So we have to negotiate, what do we want to do? But I think there is a great case to be made for that we can make the tourism practices and the food tourism practices that we already have much more sustainable in relation to environment, culture, and also social justice. So the ambition of our project is to gather examples qualitatively about what does sustainable food tourism look like in the Nordic region, and how is it understood and negotiated in these different places. And just before I get to one of the examples, I will just I'll just talk you to a little bit more about sustainability in tourism, because one way of thinking about it, which is maybe a little bit older, is also to talk about slow tourism, which was not directly sustainable tourism in the beginning, but more about, but is very closely, I think, related to it. And in this philosophy, slowness and responsible consumption and responsible tourism is seen as something that is very, very important, both in terms of environmental damage and to create maximal economic and social profit for the community offering the tourism. And here I think it's important that slow tourism is not just, and this is by a book by Michael Clancy, who says that it's not just an alternative kind of tourism product, but a different philosophy of life and way of understanding, traveling, and living away from home. And I think that is a very important point when we talk about sustainable tourism, that maybe it's not just another product, it's something fundamental in the idea of food tourism and sustainable tourism that we have to rethink. And maybe also to think differently about capitalist consumer behavior and capitalist consumer societies. Another term that I also think is very interesting here is this book by Kate Sober, and so she's also done various articles on it, where she talks about alternative hedonism. And her argument is that in an area of consumption like tourism, but any kind of consumption really, it seems that consumption and hedonism is very, very closely linked together. So our idea of pleasure are shaped by capitalist society and their idea of happiness, and also, maybe more important, that they kind of monopolize our idea of happiness. And the green transition forces us to adopt new patterns of consumption and alternative economic model, which we must embrace. And very often, this is seen as a kind of a sacrifice when we have to embrace new ideals and approaches to hedonism and tourism. But actually, what she argues is that it can also be seen as an opportunity. She has an example in her book, which I think is very interesting, where she talks to an old lady on a train. And this old lady talked about, once we were actually passengers when we went on the train. Now we're just consumers. And I think this is a very good example of the different roles that you attribute to people involved in different kind of consumption, and how you frame it and see it as an either individualistic, the consumer act, or as a kind of collective act, where I think being a passenger is a part of a system rather than an individual personal consumption. So this idea of alternative hedonism, I think, could inspire alternative form of food consumption, and maybe also challenge our dominant understanding of good food and good food experiences, which I think would be needed if we want to make food tourism more sustainable. And a central part of this is also to rethink the role of the consumer and the idea that the consumer is always right. Also, I think that the consumer should not just passively consume and demand service, but adopt a more flexible, co-creative, and responsible role in the act of consumption. And I think that is the responsible for those who offer the tourism to present such opportunities. This sounds great. I imagine a lot of you think this is interesting, but it's also in practice rather complicated to do. So maybe you would like an example, and I will give you one. Unfortunately, I don't have so much time, so I'll just keep to one here, but go a little bit in depth with this. And it is from the Faroe Islands, which was also mentioned earlier, and how they have worked a lot with sustainability, and closed for tourists and open for volunteers who wanted to restore the damages by tourism and make it a more sustainable path and so on, as we've heard before. And this is the case I want to talk about is when I went a couple of years ago with a group of students from America, and we went to this little island called Nolsoy. And here, oh, sorry, it's going a little bit too fast. I have to get back, sorry. And here we were greeted. It's a very small island, I think with 120 inhabitants, but growing and becoming more and more trendy. It's a part of just outside of Torshavn, so it's very close. But it's a really kind of small community, but very, very pretty and very, very inspiring. And here we were met by our host, who is called Thorhallur, and she had a little cafe/tourism office where you could get drinks and advice about what to visit and what to do. And she had made a program for us where we first had a guided tour of the island. This is actually from the inside of her cafe, where she's cultivating tomatoes in old milk boxes. But she had made a program where we started in the morning doing a guided foraging trip for a couple of hours and picking nettles. And she was talking to us about the biodiversity and so on of the island. And we were picking nettles, and these nettles, we were using them later for cooking pizzas together. And after lunch, we were then invited to work in the potato field she was trying to establish, but it was kind of difficult because there was a lot of bad weed. And we had to work there for an hour and a half, getting off with the bad weeds. And our payment afterwards was then waffles and hot cocoa. Very nice to have that after such a great job. But the interesting thing is here that we paid her for the morning session in like money, traditional money, and then in the afternoon we kind of contributed with our workforce rather than a financial contribution. And here you have the students and the little pizzas, and these were cooked together, so we each got a kind of shot. She showed us one, and then we could try on our own to do these very, very simple pizzas just with the boiled nettles, and then with some goat's cheese and a bit of oil. And here you have our hard work in the field where we got to get off all the wheat, and it was kind of important for her, we felt, because there was not a lot of workforce around in this part of the community. And we felt pretty well afterwards, because you could really see a difference that we've been they're having the hands in the soil and taking off all these herbs and then made a difference, but also really kind of contributed and connected with nature. And then, as you see, the waffles, the well-deserved waffles, we should say, afterwards. So a few observations from this. I think it's very important that rather than just being consumers, we were also co-creators here, contributing to the local community. And I know it's a very little task we did, but I think it's interesting task we did, and something that we felt were meaningful for a lot of us, and made us experience the local community in a quite different way, also feeling that we contributed to it. And also, I think this could be transferred to a lot of other kind of practices where you have some kind of food production. Usually you might need a hand or two of something to get a help out. And it's really something where you feel that you are valued as a tourist and participate. Also, there was a very interesting lack of luxury. We went to also the gourmet restaurant Cox, one of the others, which also was a wonderful experience. But a lot of the students actually like this better, which I think is quite interesting. And also, if you see the ingredients of what we had, it was just flour, local herbs, and a bit of cheese, and then the dough for the waffles. It's not really very expensive, but it was something that was really a lot of storytelling and experience around. And also, I think this could be used, this local exam could be used in many countries. And as we also heard this morning, Thorhallur was a very inspiring entrepreneur, being a chef and a teacher and our boss at the same time, and altering between these different kind of roles. And I think that's also the future for many of us, what we have to think. So just final slide. Food for thought for you guys. I think it's important also that food tourism can be really simple, not just like Noma simple, but simple like I've seen here, and still be a unique experience if it's curated well. Also, I think hands-on activities and participation should lead the way to disrupt the traditional roles of the guest and the host and create new models of responsible and co-creative sustainable consumption. But here I think it's important to balance, on the one hand, innovation, which you could say the pizza in this example, it's not really authentic in any way, but we had these kind of very local, authentic herbs, the nettles that we have picked ourselves and felt a part of it. So it was this kind of innovation rather than some of the old fermented goat we had in many of the other places. At the same time, it was authentic in the way that we were told about the story and the culture of these different kind of herbs. So I think balancing these two ideas with authenticity and innovation will be very important also when you curate your food experiences. And also, it's important when we think about co-creation and economic sustainable businesses, you have to balance those two things as well. Because if we just went there and not given any money for anything of the experience, I think it would be very difficult for Thorhallur to make her business run around. So co-creation should also, I think, relate to be balanced with the business model. And I have a paper here. I will share it in the chat. And please, if you want to have questions, I don't know how much time we'll have now, but I think it will be very interesting to continue this conversation elsewhere. Please write me an email. I'll put the email down there as well. And also feel free to connect on LinkedIn, and let's continue the conversation. Thank you very much.
Jonathan, thank you. Your joy was kind of infective here. You know, it was such alive and good spirit from your talk. So thank you for giving us this good energy here into this hall we are sitting in. Next up, we will, and please continue being with us there. Now and next, we will experience a short story